Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin and characterized by difficulties with reading, writing, spelling, or math. However, people with dyslexia are frequently endowed with talent in fields such as art, science, engineering, and athletics. Dyslexia appears in all cultures and languages in the world. In America, 1 out of 10 people are dyslexic.
Good afternoon. Okay. My name's Jonathan Mooney, and it's a great honor for me to be here. Every single time I speak publicly, I'm very honest about how, for me and many kids like me with learning differences, school sucks, and sucks big time. Now, I am dyslexic, I'm ADHD, and y'all know something? I am proud of it. I did not overcome dyslexia. I am proud to be dyslexic. I am proud to be a member of this community. I did not overcome dyslexia. Y'all know what I overcame? I overcame dysteachia, okay? I overcame this myth that there's one way to learn, and if you don't fit that one way, something's wrong with you. Let me give you an example of how dyslexic I am. I studied English literature at Brown University, right? Ivy League University, studied English literature, and I read in the 12th percentile. Y'all know what that means? That means that I read today, I'm 30 years old, I read like a 7th grader. I've written 2 books, and I spell at a 3rd grade level. Y'all looking at somebody who spells like a 3rd grader. I didn't learn to read until I was 12 years old. I was labeled learning disabled or dyslexic in 4th grade. I was labeled ADHD, which stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in 5th grade, and I dropped out of school for a year in 6th grade. That year, 6th grade, 12 years old, I had a plan for suicide. By the time I was in 9th grade, I was told 3 things about myself on a daily basis. I was told that I was the stupid kid. I heard that almost every day. John, you are dumb. Number 2, I heard that I was the crazy or bad kid. And number 3, I heard that I was lazy. Stupid, crazy, and lazy. I was told that every single day. Anybody else in the audience ever been told that about themselves? Few of us, right? This guy's gonna raise 2 hands and a foot, right? Yeah, you know it. We're amongst friends now, aren't we, you know? Stupid, crazy, and lazy. Because I'm different, because y'all are different, that's the message we get from traditional schooling. We're told every day that there's one way to be smart. Now that's a lie. There are multiple ways to be smart, but in school often there's one way. Let's be honest, right? In 1st grade, if you spell poorly and you got bad handwriting and you don't read well, guess what you're called? You're called stupid. Look, I know that we have euphemisms for it. I know I'm not literally called stupid. I know I'm called the at-risk learner. Anyone ever heard that one? Or my favorite, I'm the special learner, right? Who gets to ride the special bus to the special class when there's not a damn thing special about any of it, right? I spent my entire life chasing this fiction that if I just fixed my reading, I'd be normal. If I fixed my spelling, I'd be normal. When the reality is, normal people suck. There is no normal. There's only you. There's only a singular intelligence. There's only your strengths, gifts, and talents interwoven with your struggles. Normal is a dead end. LD and ADHD, when channeled correctly, are not abnormalities. They're differences. They're strengths, they're gifts, they're talents. Thank you all very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank
you. You know, the challenge in understanding this story is to understand what a monumental negation of who you are as a human being it is to be told you're stupid. I mean, I can sit here and I can talk about it, and I can tell you anecdotes of growing up in the stupid reading group and reading out loud, and all of those things, scratch the surface of what it does to a human being to point at somebody and say, your mind doesn't work, or you're bad. The real tragedy here is many of these kids are not only not stupid, they're the opposite of stupid. They are the next generation of artists or innovators or creative thinkers. They're the opposite of it. So not only are you demeaned as a human being, but your authentic self, you're really disconnected from it.
My last school was really big, 1,300 kids in the school, in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and I got beat up all the time. The classes were so big I would never get to have one-on-one time with my teachers. They didn't understand me, so all of my assignments were marked down because I didn't spell things correctly because of my dysgraphia. I didn't understand the questions because of my dyslexia. I couldn't pay attention because of my ADHD, and I got in lots of fights with the teachers because they didn't understand what I was trying to say or what I was going through.
You're always wrong. You're always working so hard to keep up. You know that something's wrong. No one's helping you. It was just something you just stuff and stuff and stuff in. Like, it's just such a painful thing, and it's such a painful thing to be confronted with yourself.
In 2nd grade, when I was starting to be diagnosed, my teacher just she sat me down one day as we were going through all these things and told me to stop pretending. And that was a trip for me, because I'm 8 years old. I'm stop pretending about what? She said that I was pretending to have a learning disability so I could get attention.
It's just a really lonely feeling. You don't really feel like anyone else really gets you or really gets where you're coming from.
I mean, it's hard to talk about not understanding something when you don't know why you're not, Because I didn't know. I just thought I was dumb. I didn't realize that there was anything preventing me from understanding. And there were some things I was good at, so I was able to kind of hide it and compensate, for a while.
The teacher go up to the board and spell out this word, and it's like deer in headlights, and you're just I don't know how to spell it even when I'm not being put on the spot. And just dreading every day you went to school, being picked on, because you're considered, one of the foul marks of the school. I just didn't like it.
Don't pick on me when it comes down to reading. And if they did pick on me to read, I'll find a way just to get out of it. I'll be the smart one of the class to make everybody laugh so they could kick me out of class.
You teachers out there, some of us don't know how to approach someone and say we have a problem. Some of us do, some of us don't. And sometimes if there is a kid like that who's failing, who's basically, why don't you just go up and ask if they have a problem?
Stress takes a toll, and constantly being confronted with your weakest parts is so frustrating. But when you don't know any better, when you don't know how to deal with it, you just kind of take it. You take it, and it's like a beating. You just keep taking it and taking it and taking it because you're like, I should just work harder.
In 6th grade, I was suicidal, and that was pretty bad. I was admitted to a hospital for suicide watch for a couple weeks. I just gave up altogether, and I would stop doing all my work because I was so frustrated that I couldn't express how I was thinking onto paper or into tests, anything.
There will be times when I'll pick up a book and it'll be exactly what I wanted to read. I don't know, just the new thing, the story, and I just really want to read it, and I can't. And it kills me. Like, sometimes I'll, like, cry. I'll pick up the book, and I'll go to read it, and it hurts. I'm not gonna wake up one morning and read. My brain's just not wired right.
I'm going to talk to you again a little bit more formally about what dyslexia is. Right? As we were talking about yesterday, it has to do with reading and writing and spelling, not with thinking. Right? It's not the same as a difficulty with learning. When a person learns how to read, there's a part of your brain right in here called the angular gyrus that does the translation work of taking those symbols and turning them into the sounds. Now, this is learned behavior, but some people learn it, and that area of the brain activates very quickly in their lives. Age 5 or 6, they get a little bit of print instruction, a little bit of idea of how to do it, some practice, and that area of the brain will light right up. There are other people for whom this area of the brain is the one that lights up. It's up here in the prefrontal cortex. That means you're trying to think your way through it. You're really working hard. You're really working hard to try to decode it, but a different area of the brain is lighting up along with some of the things along this side and back here in the visual cortex. Different areas of the brain will light up, and they're not as efficient as that area, which is the area that processes that very quickly and efficiently. It's trying to light up as many areas as it can to process that thing, and it actually literally, measurably uses 5 times more energy to do the same thing. So if you get exhausted while you're reading, that would be the reason. Keep that in mind. You're working harder for less gain often than the other people around you, but it's not because you're not as smart as they are.
Yeah, I have a question about the ADD and ADHD.
ADD can be attendant on this. People can have both, right? There are some people who are just dyslexic. There are some people who are just ADHD, and there are some people who have both. I think the numbers are something like 25% of dyslexics have ADHD, and something like 30% of ADHD people have dyslexia. So there's an overlap. Yeah.
Can dyslexia affect like how you write, like with like dysgraphia?
Oftentimes, if you're dysgraphic, it's a sign that you're having trouble forming the symbols. You know, I know people that get beautiful artists and can't write letters. That's because of the dyslexia. It's hard. And sometimes I always say, I don't know how some people get up and come to school each day. I don't know how you do it.
We don't know
it's
either.
What?
We don't know.
I know. Dyslexia is very poorly understood by almost everybody in the society, including our students, who also don't know what it is that's causing their frustration, their difficulties. They've just been dealing with them for years without anybody really explaining the cognitive or biological basis of the condition. And so the biggest difficulty is the emotional one. The first thing we have to do is what I call academic rehabilitation. Just convincing them that the school system is not going to beat them up. And giving them the idea that they are smart, they can learn to read, they can operate in an academic environment with success, and without someone constantly telling them that what they're doing is not right, when the fact is that what their teachers have been doing isn't right.
When teachers and parents are willing to step out of their own box a little and not say that this is, you need to be in special ed and there's so much confusion about dyslexia, it can really help the person that has it open the doors for them to feel good. Nothing feels good when you're not comprehending and you can't say it and you're coming home like I did, dejected again with another D stamped on your test when you struggled so hard. You know the information, but doesn't come out that way on paper. And I really didn't want to be stuck in a box. Who does want to be in a box their whole life? And so I wanted to fight to get away from that label or that judgment that just because I learned different, I was different, and therefore if I was different, then now suddenly society thought I was inferior. And I knew I wasn't. Any dyslexic knows that they're not inferior. They know that they may be different, but they've got to know that they can rise to that challenge and overcome it.
Words to look out for: struggled with, afflicted by, suffered from. Those types of words imply, oh, it's so terrible. Oh, it's awful. I was not afflicted with dyslexia. I was afflicted with a poorly designed system that expected me to be something I'm not. And those expectations and my reality did not go together. It is as though the sun will explode if you say out loud, I read bad. Right? My name's Ben Foss, and I read terribly.
There's still this element where thou must be able to read, and proficiently, and fast, and spell, and write, and I disagree. You need to read a little. I'll give you that. You got to be able to function. You got to be able to navigate the internet, for instance. If you can get to that point, good. And I'm not saying that the internet's going to be your career, but that would be my litmus test to say you know enough. You can make up for the rest. I think you have a learning spectrum. It's not digitized. And education has picked a very narrow window within a long spectrum to teach. And if you're lucky, you fall in that spectrum. And if you're a little to the side of this spectrum, you probably do okay, you'll make it. And at some point, when you get to one end or the other, they'll label you with something. And dyslexia is a popular one, ADD is another. I don't subscribe on either of those two that anybody can pinpoint this as a disease. The way I look at it is you learn outside of our, today, here, United States of America, learning spectrum. I always like to get to root cause of a problem, and the root cause of the problem here is how we're teaching, not how we're learning. And so you're labeling not a method of teaching, but the method of learning, when the problem is the reverse. And so we're trying to fix the effect and not the cause.
If a student experiences a great deal of frustration in a public or private school, he may choose to attend a school with a curriculum designed for dyslexic students.
I wouldn't have helped.
The Kildonan School in Amenia, New York, uses a program that addresses the strengths of each student while also providing an individual daily tutorial for reading.
Subject returning to me. I couldn't.
Although there are a number of these private schools throughout the country, they serve only 1% of the students with dyslexia.
His time.
Export. Emancipate. Edify.
Good.
Expedition.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Effusive.
This is long.
Effusive.
Good.
What does that mean?
Well, first off, at Kildonan, each student receives a tutorial 1 hour or so, Orton Gillingham tutoring period, which is a systematic, very sort of methodical approach to teaching students how to read and write. I've tutored now dyslexics for 8 years, and I've never had 2 kids that were alike in their dyslexia. There's so many component parts to it that although there is a category called dyslexia, I do not believe that there's any one dyslexic. I think that different dyslexics have auditory processing, verbal expression, long-term, short-term, working memory. It's all different. It's almost like maybe when you edit the film, there'll be like a soundboard. I don't know if you use a soundboard. They're all at different levels.
No immortal God escapes from you, nor any man who lives but for a day. And the one whom you possess goes mad. Even in good men you twist their minds, perverting them to their own ruin. You provoke these men to family strife. The bride's desire seen glittering in her eyes, that conquers everything.
I have kind of a tougher time learning than a normal person would, you know. I can't comprehend things, but I'm a fine reader. Like, I can read perfectly, basically, but I just cannot comprehend what I'm reading. So, yeah. I needed one-on-one help. I couldn't be in the classroom with 30 people. Public school is just way too many people. I mean, it's fun, you know, it's fun being with all your friends and stuff, but it didn't work out for me. Didn't cut it. You know, dyslexia is a serious thing with me, at least, and I know tons of kids that if you call them mentally challenged or like retarded, I mean, like, we're not retarded. Like, we're not. We are actually really smart people.
Okay, so what does this become?
It becomes x minus 3 squared. Then plus y minus 2 quantity squared divided by 1 equals 1. They didn't really quite understand me because I was always good at math. Math always came easy to me. It was a walk in the park. I could do it simply and easily. And reading, everything just fell apart. So they kind of were like, oh, well, she'll grow out of it. She's so good at math. She's so good at math, so she'll grow out of it. And then they said this for a good 3 or 4 years. And I'm staying at the same level where I am. And a year is going by and everybody else is improving, but I'm staying behind. I would never read out loud. There would be no way because it would be every word I'd be stumbling through to get through and it wouldn't sound. And usually they just tell me to stop. And I got through a sentence and I was like, everybody else got through like 3 or 4 paragraphs and I'm 1 sentence. I was 3 or 4 levels behind, and they asked me to leave the school because they couldn't. I mean, I was so far behind, and they didn't think I could catch up or anything, which I really needed at that point, some help, because I wasn't reading anything, really. Know that you're needing help, and, like, try to be specific about what is going wrong. So if you can tell them, this is where it's going wrong, or like the reading part, this is where it's going wrong, and the writing part, and try to be specific as possible to like understand your problem, and then ask for help. Ask for help is like the simplest thing you can do, and yet not many people like doing that. So, and you shouldn't be ashamed. You should not be ashamed at all for the fact that you're having this problem, or to go and ask for the help.
Good.
Ink.
Good.
Oink.
Not oink. Is there an I in there? Onk.
Onk and onk.
Good. What was this one?
Oink.
Do you see any pigs on here?
No, but there should be a pig.
Okay, but it doesn't say oink. Okay, it's not a pig word. Okay, so it's onk. Say it again. Onk.
Okay, I get these mixed. I get O words mixed up.
Okay.
Ong.
Ong. Good. Okay, now be very careful. It's not a pig.
Oink. Oink.
Onk.
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 The school wasn't helping me the way that it should have. It should have had a program that should help kids like me. But they didn't, so we had to look at 2 different schools. We said that this school would be the best for me because everybody fits in.
It makes me feel a little happy because I know that all these kids have something that's different about them, and it makes me feel comfortable. Yeah. But for some reason, eating time is a little not on the good side because I cry usually on Wednesdays, and that's kind of not that happy, but sometimes it happens and you can't stop that, but there are ways that you can.
Do you know why you feel that way?
Probably because at my old school, kids never wanted me to sit next to them. They were treating me like everybody else in the school was like a certain way and I wasn't. So they thought that different was bad, but different is good.
And when did you learn that?
Well, it's just like an instinct to me.
When I encountered school, when my mother took me to the school gates to meet the teacher through the school gates, and then the teacher was waiting for me, and I was greeted. Not greeted. I suppose I was introduced to an evil woman. It's just like going into Dracula's castle, being greeted by somebody who speaks like, with her head like this. Are you the new boy? Yes. You address me as Mrs. Adams, and don't you forget that. And there I go. Come along with me and I shall introduce you to the rest of the children. Here's some chalk. Here's the blackboard. Write your name. So I drew a picture of a little man, which was me. So the kids started to chuckle. I could hear them laughing. That's not your name. Write your name. So I just got the chalk and made some, like, just a circle, and then another circle, and then drew a dog, which was my dog, and drew whatever. Because I don't have no experience of writing, so that was it. And then she said to me, children, here we have an exhibition of failure. E is failure. This is what not to become. The reason why the word failure was written in the dictionary was because of Willard. Willard is failure. When she told me that, I said to myself then, even though I was only a child, I realized what she said. So because she said I was that, she destroyed me. So I was destroyed. So that was it. Destroyed academically. Obliterated. That is it. I became a bit of a recluse. I locked myself away. A lot. Disappear like Howard Hughes, and just stayed there working. And I did a carving of Miss Havisham on a toothpick, on the point. And the first thing my mother said to me was, that is beautiful. That is very, very nice. That is incredible. My artwork becomes a defense. So I am going to be the greatest. I am going to be the greatest in my head.
Well, no. He's been with her.
I saw a microscope on the table and I put my hand up to ask a question. And then he said, you don't need to know because your brain doesn't have Mr. Riley said, you don't need to know because your brain does not have the capacity. So it's pointless. Next. So when he said that to me, I looked on the table and I saw a microscope. And that microscope had my name written on it. So I decided to take the microscope. And they went round, each boy. Bradburn, was it you stole the microscope? And Bradburn would say, no, not me. Whittaker, was it you? No. Cottle, was it you? Lear, was it you? Thompson, was it you? Fletcher, was it you? No, sir, it wasn't me. And he came to me. I know it's not you, Wigan. You wouldn't have a brain for a microscope. Turner, is it you? Yeah, that was good. Good feeling. I know it's not you because you wouldn't have a brain for a microscope. So that was good.
And then what did you do with the microscope?
I became who I am today. I continued to create smaller and smaller sculptures. Then I started to experiment with my fingers. As I was sculpting, I was looking at the way my pulse was moving, and I started to train my pulse beat so I could work between my heartbeat. The frame is the eye, and if I wanted to put Noah's Ark inside there with 15 animals or 20 animals, I could. Me now, I could put 9 camels in the eye of the needle, which I already have. But my favourite was Alice in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. That was my favourite one. That's one I could sit back and go, yeah. Charlie Chaplin was very hard. That's one of them. That is one of the all-time favourites. Because he's on the end of an eyelash. And then, before I knew it, I was invited to Buckingham Palace to receive a medal, which is one of the highest honours you can get. It's called the MBE. Prince Charles was there, and I bowed like that, and he shook my hands, and he said to me, "That is the most phenomenal artwork I have ever seen in my whole life. How does one create such works of art, such wonders? It is beyond belief. You are true genius. Absolutely incredible." And he was shaking my hands for a long time, so my hand was being shook. So Rod Stewart was waiting there and a few more. And my hand was being shook more than the others. And he was saying to me, "How do you keep your hand so still to do this work? It is pure genius." And then I'm just thinking, thank you. Because every time he's saying that to me, I'm getting greater. And I'm looking back at the past. And I'm looking back at my learning difficulties, and then it didn't matter anymore. Dyslexic is actually a gift. That's what I believe.
One of the things that I laugh about is when anyone says that reading is a natural act. Reading is unnatural. Reading is a cultural invention. There's nothing natural about it. Every reader had to have a brain that created a whole new circuitry for that reading process. Well, in the case of dyslexia, what we have is a differently acquired circuit that's new to the species. It's a blink of the evolutionary eye. We've only been reading for basically 5,000 years. It's nothing. It is a wonderful thing to remember that this is one of the newest inventions of the species. But the children who are among us with dyslexia have always been there. And they've always been there for a reason. They have a very important role to play, that brain, in our design, in our art, in our building, in our thinking in novel ways. They've been doing that pre-5,000 years. Only in the last even 100 years have we called it something that would have a name that would sound like a disease. The heart for me, the heart of some of the emotional difficulties our kids have as consequences of learning disabilities begins with the fact that people equate being able to read with being smart, with intelligence. Reading involves many aspects, and it involves the use of our intelligence. But if you realize that reading only exists as the circuitry that connects intelligence to itself, it's not about intelligence. That intelligence already exists independently. It's being connected to the circuit. Reading is, as you know, is to me one of the great miracles of cognition, but it's not equatable with intelligence. Some of our children with dyslexia are some of our most intellectually gifted humans. It's a form of intelligence. It's a form of brain organization that they have that leads them to be oftentimes our artists, our architects, our pattern recognizers in radiology and astronomy. But they think often outside the box of our conventional left hemisphere thinking. I love them. Our species would never be what it is without that form of brain organization.
Yeah, the actual discovery was something that we did about 25 years ago, where we were just trying to understand a basic phenomenon of how chromosomes are maintained. So the chromosomes are in the cell, and they have to package all of the DNA for the genetic material in the cell. And there was this puzzle about how it is that they can be copied completely to the end every time a cell divides. The Nobel Prize was given for physiology or medicine, and the medical implications of the fundamental discovery weren't apparent until we and many other people had then followed up and understood. This turned out that this enzyme telomerase plays a major role in human disease.
When do you think you first understood that you had dyslexia?
I didn't understand it was dyslexia until much later, because at that time they weren't diagnosing dyslexia. I was told that I was a poor speller, I was taken out of classes, given remedial training, and I always thought that I was really kind of stupid. I mean, I got D's and F's in my English class, which of course I didn't really care because it wasn't going to count for anything. But looking back at those, then years later, I thought, you know, maybe there was really something going on here. And then when it came to the standardized tests, I just did very, very poorly on standardized tests. So both the SATs and the GREs. The only thing I can figure out is this connection between, you know, my complete inability to see a new word and pronounce it. I still can't do that. Reading when my kids were small, reading dinosaur books, I couldn't do it. All those dinosaur names, I would pronounce them wrong every single time. Unless I would memorize them, like Triceratops, I can get that one now, or Ichthyosaurus, but that's only because I've memorized it. And then, when my son was dyslexic, I had a little bit more understanding when he had trouble in school and needed tutoring and all of that sort of stuff. It was very clear to me that it was going to be helpful for him to get tutoring really early, and then I read all the books on dyslexia and decided that, you know, help him along, and he's done very well now and is in regular school. So, but now, you know, having thought more about the dyslexia and all that sort of stuff and read more about it, I go back and I question, you know, maybe I really wasn't as stupid as I thought I was, and I learned that I had to work hard, but maybe I was you know, putting myself in a different category because there wasn't anyone around to say it's not because you're stupid, it's because you have this other issue, which I can now say to my son. I can say, you know, look, I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins. Just because you're dyslexic doesn't mean you can't do anything you want to do.
So we acquire two types of images, those that contain functional information about where there's brain activity, and another that gives us information about brain anatomy. And that's this scan here, which is our participant's brain at this point, and we're just scrolling from the left side to the right side of the brain, and we can begin to see the brain structures that we're interested in. The goal of using brain imaging is to help us understand how the brain is specialized for different functions, and the function that we're interested in is reading. People who doubt whether there's such a thing as dyslexia, I think that there should be no doubt in their mind because the research is so clear. The technology that we use, brain imaging, is one of the areas where I think it's really helped people understand that even though this is an invisible condition, it's now become visible because we can see it in the brain. It's been known for almost 30 years now that when you look at the brain anatomy of a person with and without dyslexia, that there are some differences that you can see almost with a naked eye. And what people have found is that when you look at readers who are skilled readers, we see a network in the left hemisphere involving regions in the temporal lobe and then up in parietal areas and then in frontal regions. 3 areas that are sort of the typical network involved in reading. And what we find is that in people who are dyslexic readers, areas in the back of the brain don't tend to be engaged during the reading process like they are in non-dyslexic readers. And what this is showing you is that areas in the left hemisphere tend to be underactivated in people with dyslexia, that they're underactivating areas back here in the brain in parietal and temporal cortices. But what's striking here are the changes that we observed in the right hemisphere, and we don't think of the right hemisphere as being that involved in the reading process. And the change seems to have been brought about in part by the right hemisphere chiming in to what is normally considered a left hemisphere function. So developmental dyslexia is a learning disability. In the field of learning disabilities, it's the most prominent learning disability. It accounts for about 80% of all learning disabilities. Why do children have dyslexia? Well, for a number of reasons. Again, it's thought to be heritable, so you will see in some individuals who have dyslexia that they have it in their family. If you have a parent with dyslexia, the chances that their child will have dyslexia are between 35 and 40%. So it runs in families, we know that. I think it's important to recognize that when you work with a student who has dyslexia, that this is a lifelong issue. It doesn't go away. So it helps in terms of having them develop the right attitude to recognize that they will always have to deal with this. But the majority of the population with dyslexia is adult, and people shouldn't give up on the adults. The problem is that the adults are no longer in an educational setting where they receive interventions. And so they don't often have access to continuing to improve their reading skills. But what we and others have shown is that when you teach an adult with dyslexia to learn to read, they can still make gains, and the brain is really quite plastic. It shows a really significant way in which it's organized for reading.
There are those who believe there is something to do with the literal configuration of the brain, the ability to process certain ways, and that it is a disorder, a deficit, a dysfunction within the brain. That is a medicalized view. The other view that I prefer and tend towards is this is just human variation, and people are born all different kinds of ways. Whereas if you think the human race is divided into 2 people, the learning disabled and the non-learning disabled, it gets super questionable because people think that's what defines that person. But in essence, a label has been given to them, and it's meant to be beneficial in theory, but in many cases, and sometimes the majority of cases, it could be detrimental to the kid depending upon where their school is located, the quality of their teachers teaching them, all that kind of stuff. They become sort of second-class citizens. The system does not recognize that. Special education as a field does not really recognize that, which is very troubling indeed. People who have been labeled, that label kind of sticks with them for life. It's like it becomes inscribed upon them, and they internalize it, and they kind of come to think of themselves as not as good, inferior to, not normal, etc., etc. And I think psychologically that's very cruel to do to kids. I mean, special education really, I hate to put it this way, it's dressed up and it's called special, but it really is education of students who have been labeled disabled.
It probably started when I was in elementary school. when I was pulled out of a regular sixth grade regular class into a special education class. They never labeled me as special or as different. They just said I was really slow in comprehending and doing my work, especially with math and reading and writing.
Did they ever say you were dyslexic?
No. They just said I was slow. Sometimes when you're an inner city kid locked into a box with limited socioeconomic skills and things like that, you can't really see yourself as being beyond a learning disability child or student. I think that label sometimes really places students in a box where they limit their abilities. And it's hard for them to see what they're good at once they're labeled. So I sat, did my work, and just moved on. Never really receiving much help, but I guess because I was in a smaller class, I was supposed to, but not really.
How long did you stay in the special ed?
Until I graduated high school.
Once the kid is placed, the kids used to call it the Roach Motel. Remember that advertisement? Once you check in, you never check out. And something like 2% of kids go back into general ed or become decertified and don't have their IEP. Some minuscule amount, like 1 in 50 or something. The kids who possibly are labeled dyslexic. I have to go on record as there are very few really good programs for kids who have been labeled dyslexic in public schools. I would say that at least 50% of kids with learning disabilities drop out, especially in the self-contained classrooms. So it's always been a big issue for me that kids who are labeled disabled, whether it's learning disabled or anything else, really should have access to all of the other kids and every learning opportunity too, because it's more of a question of civil rights in a democracy. Like, who's to say you shouldn't really be in the classroom with 95% of your non-disabled peers? Who benefits from labeling kids with disabilities? Who benefits from it? Oftentimes, they're not the ones who benefit from it. Schools can run smoother, more efficiently. Teachers can be trained in clipped programs. You learn this, you learn this. But does it really benefit the kids who are labeled disabled? Not the majority of them, in my experience.
So after high school, I tried to apply to Community College of Philadelphia, and I took a test, an entry-level test, and I failed. And I went to a counselor, and she said, "Who told you can be here? You know, how did you even get to this far?" I mean, she yelled and screamed, and that was the worst experience I ever had. I gave up for a while. And I thought that this was my life. I started cleaning, really. I thought that, okay, this is it. Actually, I ended up cleaning for the School District of Philadelphia. And I was in there, I was actually cleaning for quite some time because I thought that this is my ability. This is all I can do. I still had that drive somewhere deep inside of me that I knew I could do better, but I really didn't know how. My faith kept me going, honestly. My faith and just knowing this has to be something better than this. I couldn't be limited to just being told that I was dumb and stupid and just embracing it. I knew it was something better for me. I just didn't know how to get it.
Dyslexia is a special way of seeing things. I like to call it a different kind of mind.
What kind of mind?
In Theo's case, first rate. He has the brain power. He just has a glitch in the way he takes in information.
A glitch?
Yes, he just has a problem in the way that he processes language.
Does that mean that there's nothing we can do?
Not at all. There are specialists who can help dyslexics overcome their learning problems. All he has to do is work with the program they've set up.
You mean if my son does what they want him to, he can be helped?
Yes.
From a episode of The Cosby Show, that's actually, I thought, wow, I struggle with reading and writing. They were talking about how Theo challenges were with dyslexia, and I never knew what dyslexia was at the time. A light went on, and it was a relief because all these years I never knew what I had. I just struggled. I went on to college, or I went back to college with the help of a tutor, Judith Mazer, who's still a tremendous support to me. I worked with her for 3 years prior to going back to college, and I applied to Harcum College. And I got in, I got accepted, and I completed Harcum within 2 to 3 years with a 4.0. I believe dyslexia is a part of who you are, but it's not who you are as a person, it's just what you have.
More students with dyslexia are attending four-year liberal arts colleges like Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. If a student discloses her disability, she is protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act that ensures she receive the accommodations needed to succeed with college-level work.
I have been still dealing with this anxiety about going into a classroom, and it does take a lot. It takes a lot of energy, and people don't realize how that wears down on you after a while, and kind of how easy it is to just give up and fall through the cracks. It's actually taken a while for me to be able to talk to my housemates and have them not go, why are you here? But to really talk to them about the struggles that I'm facing. Because I think for them, in their minds, you have this limitation. Why are you here? What I really wanted to do is definitely give you this accommodation letter and make sure that you understand everything that's on it.
Okay, all right, good. That's a good place to start. Okay.
This is kind of always a balancing act for me, whether or not, how much I want to disclose.
One of the reasons why we try to at least teach in 2 or 3 different modalities because we have lots of people with different learning styles in the class. We have a young man who is who's slightly autistic, and he has Asperger's. Say it again.
Asperger's.
Asperger's. And then we have two people with dyslexia. Mm-hmm. And one person with anxiety, panic, extreme anxiety, so I've got to watch her rhythm and how much she can take. And so that's why we try to focus the learning so not only the instruction deals with whether, with different learning styles and different patterns, but also the presentation. I taught mime one time to a woman who was blind. And that was such a great experience for me because it really taught me about how many of my references were visuals and how much I used the blackboard. So I had to switch everything around to make sure that she, could understand the concepts and stuff and do a lot of tactical stuff, using her hands and things. So yeah, because the major thing is for you to achieve success. So however, and so we just say where the shore is. And then you can choose whether you want to breaststroke, whether you want to crawl, whether you want to do it underwater.
Okay, so for me, visual processing is probably the best. It's helpful for me to be able to look back at notes, but I don't take notes as fast as I'd like to. I think that what might be interesting to try with you, which hasn't worked with other professors, but I think it might work, is just maybe after class coming up and expanding on some of the things that I've jotted down.
Perfect.
Because usually something resonates with me and then I want to keep talking about it. I don't really understand how other people get through. I think some people kind of hide it or I have no idea, because this is how I've learned that I get what I need to get through. by having these types of meetings. And we are supposed to have these types of meetings in order to legally have the school provide these services. But I've been told by some professors who have been here for years that sometimes I'm the first student who's ever done that with them. And I'm not sure why that is. And that scares me a little bit. But also that dyslexia is associated with all the other disabilities, and all of a sudden, once you say dyslexia, all of a sudden what pops into head is all the other students who are having issues in the class. And so there isn't an understanding by professors on what that actually means.
The U.S. government continues to give huge tax breaks and payouts to the oil, gas, and coal industries. Meanwhile, the fledgling solar and wind industries are left to beg and plead just to get extensions of their modest tax credits.
One of the things that I've just kind of realized is that not being able to read as at a young age made it so that I don't have a lot of the strategies that other people do, and I don't have, even with assistive technology, I haven't really developed the skills of comprehensive reading. And so I feel like I'm constantly kind of playing catch up with that. I can feel that your brain has to think in a completely different way when you're reading text. And my brain hasn't completely adapted to it yet.
From a woman with a battery-powered radio, they learned that the media were talking about the encampment.
If this is the first friend you make at college, let's just say it's not a very welcoming sort of environment.
Encampment. Officials were being asked what they were going to do about all those families living up on the freeway.
There are so many times where I never thought I'd make it. If I could project myself back in time and tell my kindergarten self, you're gonna be here, there's no way I would have believed it. For a long time, I'm thinking, like, this is a privilege I have to work for. That this is a privilege I will never have innately, but I kind of have to fake it to make it. But really, I feel like at this point, I need to believe that I have just as much right to be here as anyone else.
When I tried to express to people that books cornered me in the form that they were in, they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear I had a hard time reading. Well, not my son, or, well, you struggle a little bit, but really if you focus, if you really bear down, you can probably do it. Well, someone in a wheelchair can get upstairs. I've seen them do it at protests. My friend David Carmel, he could do it, throw himself on the stairs, and with his elbows, pull himself up, one by one, right? But that's not, in our colloquial sense, getting upstairs, right? He's proving that they need a ramp. Overcoming dyslexia is a catchphrase that belies an interest in fixing people. I don't need to be fixed, you know? And by the external measures, I've done it. I've succeeded. I have a JD MBA from Stanford. I have a job in Silicon Valley. I have a happy life. I have a wonderful wife. I have a home. I have everything that everyone's supposed to get in the American dream. Do I need to overcome? No. I read terribly. I spell abysmally. I am in the bottom 1% in my ability to identify a letter when you show it to me. Off the charts. I have MRIs that show zero activity in my temporoparietal lobe. Not zero, but very, 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 very little, which is where most people have like a Christmas tree of activity. the act of reading the word is like taking me back in front of the stairs and having me go up them on my elbows every time. At some point, you need to let go of that and move forward. Because the interesting part about dyslexia is the future. It's not what happened, it's what's gonna happen. Moving forward, I've gotten accommodations. Now, I can take a device and take a photograph of something and have it read to me. I can scan it with a flatbed scanner and turn it into speech so that I can hear it. I used to fax my term papers home to my mother and have her read them to me over the phone, right? Now, I have a computer do it. The computers are doubling in their capability every 2 years, every 18 months. So I knew that soon I'd be able to put it all together in one box. And I started thinking about how to design that. And what I came up with was take a picture and hear it. Point, shoot, listen. Now I turn on the camera and I take a picture like so.
Since long before that, as many efforts always have, they both stand inside along the narrow row of chairs, each one turned to face the street. She looks for their waiter but can't.
That's it reading. And so,
But, waiter.
Waiter. I probably couldn't spell that word.
W-A-I-T-E-R.
We just took that text off the page and are able to read it. And that gives me access to the text. It's that simple. I have access. Now, I believe that this technology is a ramp into a book. And this is one embodiment of it. There are many others that will be out there in the future. And I'm committed to making it available to more and more people. Because if you have this access, then you have access to that text, and ultimately you have access to hope and to self-respect.
A recent study sponsored by the Kauffman Foundation reported that a staggering 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic. The study reports that successful dyslexics develop skills to compensate for their deficits, and these skills provide an edge in business. These entrepreneurs have excellent verbal communication, a willingness to delegate authority, and are highly creative in problem solving.
You know, we're a foundation that focuses on the formation of new businesses. The last thing on earth a foundation that deals with businesses would ever focus on is the question of dyslexics and the connection of these traits in individual human beings with business formation. Success, dyslexia. Here are 4 or 5 people who created huge, critically important companies to the United States and to the world. Dyslexic? How can this be? The real issue is who has the talents to put together huge new companies and create the new? So one of the questions was, are these people more visionary? Can they see things differently? They come to a realization that the society keeps pronouncing that a number of the skill sets that are necessary for success they don't seem to have. And they go out and build the environment in which they will succeed. That's sort of my working hypothesis to explain why all these entrepreneurs exist who have traits of dyslexia. And lots of those people didn't go to college. I am amazed again and again, even in technical businesses, where people see a business they can start. And you know, that may be startling, but if you think about it, you don't have to have a degree to become an entrepreneur. And it's these people who are the resistors, the outsiders, make inordinate contributions to benefit humankind. They expand human welfare. Entrepreneurs expand human welfare. And to the extent we have more dyslexics doing this, you might say that dyslexics have a particular license on the capacity to expand human welfare.
I think when you start by taking really big risks. And you've got nothing to lose oftentimes. In my case, I had nothing to lose. I had no money, so you just went for it, whatever you could possibly do. And if you made $1 and lost it the next day, no one's worrying about it. I still think I take risks, but they have to be far more calculated. There's far more responsibility. Say I'll put $1 million aside to work on a project, and if we lose it, we lose it. And believe me, I've done it. I've fortunately made more than I've lost, and therefore managed to stay above water here. But I've lost millions and millions and millions of dollars. So I was 24 years old, 23 years old when I first saw a pellet stove, and I went to this stove shop and said, geez, this is an amazing thing. I've never seen anything like this. And they had these pellets in there. And he said, so what, are you interested in buying a stove? And I said, yeah, I kind of am. I mean, it's kind of neat. Where do all these pellets come from? And he said, well, Montana. And I said, well, that seems a little crazy, Montana. I don't buy my firewood from Montana. Well, I split firewood, and everybody around me would never buy firewood from Montana. But why would this come from? Well, it's the only place that makes them. And I said, well, geez, well, why doesn't anybody make it here? And he goes, I don't know. Why don't you make it here?
But it's a pretty good sized facility. This is one of the larger ones in the country. It's about 5 weeks of wood behind us here, and this pile, by the way, extends much longer than it is wide, and it comprised about 20 tractor trailer loads a day of wood, and here's one coming in right now.
Each of these plants is offsetting producing something around 1,000, 1,200 gallons of oil equivalent of energy per hour. Somewhere in the 8, 9, 10, 11 million gallons a year of oil that we're displacing with these facilities. My ultimate goal is to have dozens and dozens and dozens of these facilities. I think technically it was in the 2nd grade that I was labeled with dyslexia. I knew at an incredibly young age I had difficulties achieving things in school that everybody else was achieving and I was expected to achieve. And of course the curriculum I was given, reading was one of my challenges, still is, and probably a combination of not being very good at it and also having so many awful memories of those days in school. I really don't read at all. I've read 2 books in my life. So reading was brutal, and I spent years and years and years having people, tutors, trying to get me to read. And I was it's probably about 8th grade is where I first actually learned to read. I faked it. I got through school really not being able to read. Oh, in the high school machine shop, that was the one thing in high school I could go in and just eat alive. And the teacher just loved it. I mean, that was the only pat in the back I got that I knew wasn't sympathy. And Pasanka was his name. And he would stay after school, just let me play. And that's where I learned. And all the other classes you could take away. Just not that one. Sorry. School stuff. In school, it was an amazing decision. And, I really suffered through school. And I finally got to high school and I had these shops, these, really amazing places. These teachers really liked what I did. And
what were you making?
Oh, everything. I mean, it was parts and pieces and machines, and I like bicycles, so I was creating new parts. I couldn't afford the real fancy bicycle parts, so I would copy them and create them in the machine shop. And they had the wood shop next door, and I'd build molds and come up with ideas and models, and then go over to the metal shop, and they had this auto shop. I would work hours and hours and hours in that shop at night. Wasn't allowed to be in there. I mean, they even taped the damn thing off. And he would turn on the power and let me go. But systematically, the school shut down all the shops. And it was the last blow.
So it was during your time in high school, they closed it.
And it was deplorable. And ultimately, obviously, I got out of high school, made that attempt at college. That failed. And then I heard that this machine shop was up for sale. So they were going to auction everything off. And I was the first one in line, and that same Joe Pasanka was there to help them figure out what was worth what and sell it. And he was in charge of selling it. I very carefully took the $2,000 and adjusted what I felt the values were and everything to make sure it spread over evenly. And I said, Jesus, this isn't enough money. There's nowhere near enough money, and this isn't a fair price. And he told me that he said the value of something is what someone is willing to pay, and you're the only one here, so you're paying exactly what it's worth. And I'll never forget that term. So I bought it and loaded up all the machinery and took it home. And loaded it in my basement and reconfigured this whole thing. I didn't even have enough electricity in my house, so I had to rejigger the electricity outside and set up all these electric transformers and things in order to power all this up. I needed 3-phase power, and managed to get it all going. And in that basement, I started creating this company. And so out of my house, with that high school machine shop, built this entire factory, and I mean literally stuff from the dump. I went to rubbish heaps and piles, and because I just didn't want to spend money on anything, and we were making pellets there. It did work. You'd ask it, is it a gift? Absolutely. I can assure you, you couldn't offer me $100 million right now to take away my dyslexia, if that's what you want to call it, and put me into normal learning. There's no amount of money you could give me right now, and I would have paid you anything in school to make it go away. So it went from a huge burden in this terrible disease to a gift that I am very confident is why I'm as successful as I am, and hope to be far, far, far more successful.
And so for me, the learning disability, I felt locked in there. And I had to get out. And I found a way. And anybody else with a learning disability can do exactly the same thing. The mind is huge. The mind is incredible. And there's not just one way that it works. So what works for you, and you know it, you can feel it in your gut. When I read, I'm not reading necessarily to comprehend, but I'm photographing and memorizing everything that I see. And I can go back and I can tell you where that is, what number is, just like I can still remember Roberta Walker's number down in Hinckley, 760. And I can place that number on the keypad and put it into my brain. And I remember things that way. And it actually became my gift and my way to be successful in my career. Even being a paralegal, secretary, assistant, anything that I was doing work-wise, if someone said, well, you wouldn't know how to do that, because maybe you'll pick up on my dyslexia, or you'll ask me to read and I'm not comprehending it right, therefore they'll see something and think she doesn't know what she's doing. Yes, I do. The minute I've been given that challenge, you will see. And I think that it's something that I'm very driven still. When public health and safety is put in such harm's way, with so little disregard in making it right, I can't help myself but to come forward and have to really be a voice for those people. So, no, again, I am not afraid of dyslexia at all, nor should anybody else be. I said in the beginning, and I'll tell you again, hindsight, it was my gift. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't have dyslexia. And it opened a whole lot of doors for me. It challenged me. It got me outside of that box. I didn't want to be labeled. It taught me to stand up and use my voice and be proud of who I am. And I do. If you look at history, if you look at the people you've interviewed and the studies they've done, I I think it's a great gift. I think it's a wonderful form of intelligence. I really, really do.